The 1960s, a time when civil rights movements and protests filled the newspapers. The 1960s was a time of when John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement, and protests about the ongoing Vietnam War dominated the news. The end of the 60s brought a racial protest that would take place in the unlikeliest of places. Wyoming did not have as much public protest at the time, at least not as much as other states. At the University of Wyoming, Vietnam War protests were still prominent, along with many other colleges around the country. Wyoming was almost all white. Today, around 3,722 out of 500,000 Wyomingites are black. That number was even less in 1969, where only 28 out of 8,000 students at the University of Wyoming were black, and half of them were on the football team. These 14 black players would bring a storm of media and protests to the quiet little college town of Laramie. The 14 black football players were kicked off the team for planning a subtle protest for the rights of black priesthood in the Mormon Church. These players took on the responsibility of sparking the racial integration movement in college football and creating one of the most well-known incidents in college football. The 1960s was a time of protests and movements in America. All over the nation, Vietnam protests were going on in college campuses. However, there was also a quieter movement, a movement in college football to integrate all the teams and to provide equal rights for black players. Harry Edwards, a black sociologist at San Jose State, is widely viewed to be the first person to start protesting in college football, along with all other sports. San Jose State was one of the first colleges to have their sports teams start protesting BYU and the LDS Church. His movement started to grow in the 1960s until it reached Wyoming, where it exploded all over the country. Wyoming was a rising powerhouse in the late 1960s. They had been brought into the national spotlight after a 28-20 win in the 1967 Sun Bowl over the University of Texas El Paso. They responded to their successful season with a 10-0 regular season record, topped off with a number 5 ranking and a Sugar Bowl appearance. Wyoming had started to grow their recruiting class, now able to recruit a wide variety of players from all over the country. At the start of the 1969 season, the Cowboys had 14 black players, most of them valuable starters. Wyoming started 4-0 in 1969 when these 14 players were kicked off the team. On October 14, 1969, head coach of the football team, Lloyd Eaton, received a letter from Willie Black, chancellor of the Black Student Alliance on campus. He had objected to the racist beliefs of the Mormon Church, which controlled and operated the University of Brigham Young, Wyoming's opponent on the upcoming Saturday. Willie Black had demanded, upon several other things, not to host the game. 2 days later, Coach Eaton was notified by one of his black players, Joe Williams, that the 14 players planned to wear black armbands in their game protesting the Mormon Church's beliefs on black priesthood. Eaton notified Williams that if they do still plan on wearing them, that they would be kicked off the team. On October 17th, the 14 black players met with Eaton at the field house to discuss his ruling. Eaton then took them out into the stands of War Memorial Stadium, where he told the players, "Gentlemen, as of now you are no longer Cowboy football players." The players tried pleading their cases, and one player even remarked that he was preparing to join the church, where Eaton replied, "Isn't that something? You plan to join the church and abide by its beliefs for the rest of your life, but you plan to demonstrate against it tomorrow?" He also said racist remarks, some of the players claimed. This caused quite a stir around the country. That night, the Wyoming Board of Trustees, Wyoming University's President William Carlson, and Governor Stanley Hathaway met to discuss the players' terminations. They had talked to the 14, who had only wanted to come back on the team if they could go on with their protest and if Coach Eaton was fired. The game went on the next day, without the 14. Wyoming won the game and their next one. However, they lost their last 4. The 14 players filed a civil rights lawsuit against the university and Coach Eaton, claiming it was their rights for political protest. The hearing was set for November 10th later that year. Just before the hearing started, the judge had asked Eaton's lawyers if Eaton wanted to meet with the 14 to discuss a possible solution, in which Eaton agreed. However, the Black 14's lawyer denied the request and didn't tell his clients about it. The 14 lost the trial due to Article 21, Section 25 of the Wyoming Constitution, which guarantees perfect toleration of religious sentiment and provides that no inhabitant of Wyoming shall ever be molested in person or property on account of his or her mode of religious worship. Also, Article 1, Section 18 guarantees free exercise of religion and worship without discrimination or preference. Even though Eaton had his rights to kick these 14 players off the team, this did spark a lot of racial controversy. Wyoming found it hard to recruit black players after this incident. Wyoming went 1-9 the next season. That was Eaton's last season as Wyoming head coach. Wyoming suffered in the early 70s and didn't reach another bowl game until 1976. College football had already started the climb to integrate their teams, but wasn't completely integrated until Georgia, LSU, and Ole Miss integrated in 1972. There was racial controversy all over the country during this time period. Oregon State's head coach suspended a black player named Fred Milton on his team for having a goatee. Washington head coaches Jim Owens suspended 4 black players for lack of commitment. John Pont at Indiana suspended 16 black players for boycotting a practice, which 4 were eventually reinstated. This came as a realization around the league that there was racist behavior in college football. The drive to abolish these behaviors in the sport had begun. Only a few of Wyoming's 14 graduated from Wyoming University, although all would graduate college at some point. 3 players withdrew from the lawsuit to meet with Eaton, and the 3 played in the 1970 season. College football gradually became more and more integrated, and racial disputes grew rarer by the day. By the early 80s, 40% of the SEC players were black. Slowly, college football became a less racist place. Kevin McKinney, a student assistant in the university's athletic department at the time of the scandal, shared his experiences with me. One of the things he told me was that the 14 players were viewed as rebellious and were viewed more bitterly as the football team started to tank in the 70s. The university was not ready to handle this kind of negative publicity. In one of the games after the incident, the New York Times was in the press box covering a game. The university would be connected to the scandal forever and had a very hard time recruiting black players. Coach Eaton resigned after the 1970 season. However, it was mutual. These days, coaches are not the same as they were back in 1969. They don't have complete control over their players, which is what ultimately led to this event. College football was never the same after the 1969 season. All of these events had shed light on a controversial topic. The NCAA took steps to reduce racism around the league, and so did many of the universities. The league was fully integrated within a few years of 1969. Racism in the sport was noticed and slowly decreased. Today, African American players are found on every team all over the country. College football is a better place than it was in 1969, and more competitive. Instances like those in 1969 are rarely found in today's society. Thanks to the Black 14, along with other controversies, college football is not the same place as it was in 1969. It is better.